All right. Hi, everyone. Of course, I'm your instructor, Kylie, and I will be going over the study guide for exam two today. I am terribly sorry I look like a mess. I have been dealing with COVID at my house, so it's been a weird week in my life. So I'm sorry that normally I don't look this much like a potato, but all right. So Chapter or not chapter 2. Exam 2 is gonna cover chapters 5 through 8, and then the Cotton et al. Reading. Those are the only chapters and the only reading you will be responsible for this exam. So let's go ahead and get started. So the study guide starts with Cotton et al., and it says child adolescence and young adulthood, communication and tech, family and friends, communication and tech, and gaps in research. So if you go to the 10.1 TSGs in comm research. And the fourth slide is the Cotton et al. Reading. That's where you're going to find all of that information. So, with the Cotton et al. Reading, I really just wanted to give the highlights of what you were expected to know. So, this short blurb is exactly what you need to know for this exam. So, don't spend more time than necessary studying this article or reading this article. It's everything you need to know is on this slide right here. So, child adolescence and young adulthood and exposure to technology, it changes through the lifespan. Okay, so we are constantly exposed to technology from the time we're born. And I'm sure you have all heard that putting a child in front of a TV is bad. But when we get home from work or class or whatever it is, what's the first thing that we do? We turn on Netflix or Hulu or whatever. So we are constantly being exposed to technology from the time we are born. So think about hospital waiting rooms. I didn't grow up in a super, you know, affluent area or anything, but even the waiting rooms in my local clinics back in my hometown in Illinois, they had technology. So if you were going there for your checkup with your child, that child's going to be exposed to whatever is on the television or the technology. So there can be some issues with exposure to too much technology, but there are helpful forms and hurtful forms. So through pages 11 to 20, just make sure you can delineate what forms are helpful, what forms are hurtful, um, and really know the times spent with each different type of technology at different levels. Okay. So, family and friends. Many people use technology to maintain and form relationships. So, I've heard from several people that Facebook really isn't a thing anymore for college age students. You have one because your mom wants to check up on you, wants to see what you're doing. Your grandma, it's the same thing. They love seeing your pictures, they love posting way too much. And most times it's inappropriate things that they're posting, but I digress. But many of you might use technology to keep in touch with family and friends on what you've been up to, how your life is going. But there's also dating apps that we use. So your parents may not know anything about dating apps like Tinder, Grinder, Bumble, Hinge, anything like that. Um, Maybe even some of you don't know anything about those apps because they're not something you engage with, right? So there's different uses of technology. However, these technological advances keep getting um, better, I guess. So thinking about it like this, is it Bumble? Yes. Bumble now has a feature where you can actually use the dating app to make friends. So you're not using it to find a date, you're using it to make friends. And this is this built-in feature that's going to be different from what you do to what maybe your friends do or your family does. Maybe your friends only use Bumble for dating. Maybe your family has no clue what Bumble is. My friend Lindsay, she was telling me about this dating feature, and I had no clue about it. I've never used Bumble in my life, so I didn't know anything about what the site really is or does or whatever, any of those dating sites. But she was like, "Oh yeah, I use it to find dates, but like if I just want to meet friends, because she just moved to Chicago. She's like, if I want to make friends, I can just toggle the switch over, and it'll put me in connection with people who I want to be friends with, which is pretty cool." And then gaps. There's always going to be gaps in literature because this technology is always changing. If you have a brief understanding of the paragraph, I think it's on page 20, um, you'll do just fine for that on the exam. So that is the Cotton et al. Reading. If you have any questions that I did not answer from that reading, please let me know. All right, so let's pull up the study guide again. Chapter 5. So we've got age stereotypes, well being of older adults, age stereotype domains, advances of age related change. All right, so chapter 5. That's going to be 7.1 stereotyping and family. All right, let me pull up the study guide again. All right, so having a basic understanding about some of the age stereotypes in family communication, circa 2007, CAT, CPA, ASI, I think that's important to understand, just have a basic understanding. Um, so we all typically have this negative stereotype for aging. We think it's this bad thing, but we've talked about several times in the semester that it's not really this bad thing like we think. It's more how you feel. So, stereotypes are severely impaired, despondent, and shrew. There are some positive age ones, like, oh, that older person is so cute. I just want to adopt them and make them my grandma, right? The perfect grandparent. I don't know. We have some positive ones, but typically when we think about aging, we think about the back pain, the body pain, hearing loss, death, maybe not of ourselves, but those around us, right? So there's a lot of negatives that come with aging. So, um, can't find in my notes. All right, so the communication accommodation theory, it's altering your communication patterns to your communication partner, in essence. That is a very basic cookie cutter, watered down version. But that's what that theory is. You can check chapter 5 for that if you want to go a little more in depth. But really, it is all about how we change our communication. So, when we're talking with older adults who we believe are hearing impaired, whether they are or not, we tend to speak louder and slower because we want to accommodate for them. It's the same thing when walking around campus back before Corona, and somebody came up and asked you for directions. If it was somebody who you thought was similar to you wouldn't change your communication habits. But the second you think that there's a difference between you and the communication partner, you accommodate for them, right? So there was a study conducted where an American student walked up to excuse me, walked up to another American student and asked for directions, and the one providing the directions was like, "Oh, you go down this street, you turn east, you go down 2 blocks, and then you hang a left," or whatever those directions were. When it was a foreign exchange student, those directions changed. So they would tell them exactly like they told the American student, but when the foreign student did not understand, they would slow their communication down and really talk down to them, right? So you're going to go down this hill, right? And that shows communication accommodation, and that can be problematic, of course. I'm sorry. I think I got an email or something. Um, the communication predicament of aging model, CPA, cues suggest the communication partner receiver of the communication was old, and negative stereotypes of physical and intellectual declines will begin to occur and activate beliefs about accommodations necessary, right? So, this communication partner gave us these cues. Before they said anything, before they did anything, they gave us these cues that they're old. So, we start thinking and really pulling from those negative stereotypes, and therefore we begin to activate those beliefs and start to accommodate. So the CPA is a build off of CAT, if that makes sense. It's using CAT as a framework to explain why these negative stereotypes are so influential. And then the ASI, the Aging Stereotypes and Interaction Model, was built on by the was built on the CPA by acknowledging the personal and situational cues. So these typically call forth the positive age stereotypes rather than focusing on the negative feedback cycle. So with something like that, oh, I know this person. They're not the old hard of hearing. They're just my perfect cute little grandma, right? So that's using age stereotypes, but in an interaction where you know personally the receiver of your message. Okay. So let's talk about some family communication and well being of older adults. So with family communication, it is a separate brand of or a separate subfield of communication, but it still can be applied to what we're learning. So Edwards and Noller in 1998 studied relational quality and communication from family caregivers and older adults' well-being. So results showed that the use of patronizing communication was actually more associated with poor health outcomes, right? For the um, older adults. Sorry. So when we change our communication, when we talk down to our grandparents because they don't know how to use Facebook, um, my grandparents call it the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram. And like, there's no the, right? Like, I know that, you know that, but they don't know that. But if I were a caregiver, for an older adult in my family, and I talked down to them and was patronizing towards them. So I talked more loud or I talked slower. I was trying to over accommodate. That's going to have poor health outcomes because they're going to start to internalize. They're going to self stereotype um, everything that's going on. They internalize their stereotypes and they begin to assimilate. Okay, let's see. So there's some research that suggests how to provide assistance or support. So approach a situation as partners, divide the duties for each person's capabilities. So, you know, I'll find the assisted living facilities, I'll find a bunch of them, and then we'll go through them together. And you ultimately make the decision you want to live in, or if you want to live in one, right? So that's one of those things where the work is divided based on ability. The older adult may not know how to search for things like that, but we do. And so we can help. So approaching the situation as partners rather than I'm doing this and you're just going to live with my decision. And using adult children for communication between third parties and parents. So, um, adult children to speak with the parent in interaction. So, think about if you were a caregiver for an older adult and you are talking with the older adult to the physician. You're not talking over them, you're not talking for them. But really use that to drive the points home. There might be some things that you can say differently um, that's going to impact the well being, right? So, really just focusing on the older adult and trying to get away from those patronizing stereotypes. All right, so age stereotype domains, advances of age related change. All right, so for age stereotype domains, they offer alternative views of age stereotyping. So they're kind of like prototypes or subtypes that are defined traits. Age stereotypes are thought to be domain specific. So they all fit within a specific area. And this allows for positive stereotypes for specific domains and negative stereotypes for other specific domains. So you need to know what each of these domains are. Family and partnerships is the first, right? So think about the stereotypes that can go with family and partnerships for older adults or aging. Even if you think about it as like family and relationships as a baby, a toddler, a child, early adolescent, adolescent, young adult, adult, middle aged, older adult. However, you want to think about it. Maybe it'll be on this timeline, maybe it won't. But however you want to think about it, think about those stereotypes that are with um, stages of aging. Second is friends and acquaintances. Think about the stereotypes that go along with friends and acquaintances as you age. I mean, think about when you were, I don't know, in kindergarten. In kindergarten, we could make friends so easily. So why is it so hard when we're an adult? Why what makes it so much more different, right? So just thinking about things like that. Third, religion and spirituality. What changes? How does it change? Fourth, leisure and social or civic activities. Hmm, sorry about that. And I'm getting these right off the fourth slide of the 7.1 stereotyping. So if you're not taking notes right now, that's totally fine. Um, so, fourth, leisure and social or civic activities. What do older adults do for fun? How is that different from what you do for fun? Six, personality and way of living. How does your personality and way of living? What stereotypes are there about those? Oh, that was five. I'm sorry. Five is personality and way of living. Six is financial situation, dealing with money related issues. I mean, we work our whole lives and then all of a sudden we're just allowed to retire when we're 75 or 80. And it's getting to the point where people can't do that anymore. They don't have a good enough pension. So, how does that change? What stereotypes are there? Seven, work and employment. Many older adults pride themselves on still being able to work. They could retire. I mean, my grandmother is mid to late 70s. Like, she was, I think, one of the last age groups that could have retired at like 65. But she prides herself on the fact that, like, she gets up and goes to the clinic. She was a surgical scrub nurse and now she's a nurse at the clinic. I don't think she works in surgery anymore, but she does work with surgeons. She prides herself on that. And she's mid to late 70s. Like, what stereotypes go along with working in employment when you're older? And then physical and mental fitness, health, and appearance. That's number eight. sorry, make sure you know those age stereotype domains. Okay. I would also know the results, and those are the next couple like numbered items below that. So results did vary, but typically older persons were rated by older persons or older cohorts most positively in family and partnerships, religion and spirituality, and work and employment domains. Those are the three that really were rated highly and positively with the stereotypes with older people and older cohorts. By older people and older cohorts, older adults were most negatively rated in friends and acquaintances, physical and mental fitness, and financial situation and money issues. Okay. Those are the three that they were most negatively related in. So make sure you have an understanding of those. And then younger cohorts, younger adults rated older adults more positively in religion and spirituality and life satisfaction, right? Reminiscing on our lives and our years. So just make sure you know those. All right. Awareness of age related change. So, research examined individuals' experience in aging in daily life with a focus on awareness. So, how aware are you to these changes of aging? The focus is how people see themselves in relation to their chronological age. The findings suggest that older adults tend to report subjective ages that are younger than their chronological ages, right? So it's not like they're saying, oh, I'm 60 when really they're 87, but they're saying, I don't feel a day over 70, right? They're using these subjective ages to say that you're as young as you feel. It's this type of mentality. And I might be 87, but I feel like I'm 72. It's glorious, right? And then you have young adults, I don't know, middle age, I'm not middle aged, but late 20s, who I'm like, oh, I don't feel a day over 60, right? Because I can feel these physical effects of changing and aging on my body. And then, two, younger subjective ages are associated with more positive self perceptions and higher levels of well being. So, by feeling young, by getting yourself out there, I feel young, I feel good, I feel great, you feel the more positive feelings about yourself, and that helps your well being. So, that's important too. All right, so that is chapter 5. Again, if there are any questions I didn't answer, please don't hesitate to reach out. So let's go to chapter 6. Let me pull up the study guide again. Oh, okay. So post sex time interval, PTSI, pillow talk, and long term relationships are the three that we're going to be talking about for chapter 6. So for this book, there was another, or for this chapter, we're going to do chapter 6 and Hummer et al. But Hummer et al. Is no longer required for the exam. You're not going to be tested on that, so don't even bother trying to study it. It'll just be a waste of your time. All right, so let's go into PTSI. So it's an area that's widely understudied. It was thought to be postcoital time interval, but that's based on terminology and privilege. And the PCTI has changed to PTSI. This is just like a little fun fact if you wanted to throw that in to spice up your answer. Basically, it's because PCTI leaves out entire sexual communities. So that's why it changed to PTSI, post sex time. But PTSI really focuses on pillow talk and the intimate communication that occurs after. But think about pillow talk within generations and at various relationship levels. Um, and it is studied more than just heterosexual penetrative sexual experiences, right? So it can include sexual encounters such as kissing, that's considered a sexual encounter, versus, you know, going all the way. So think about how that communication might change throughout your lifespan, right? Think back to when you had your first kiss. Did you talk to that person after it happened? Did you feel awkward? Did you, I mean, what did you do? And again, this is not something that like I want you to share with me. I don't need to know any of this. But like thinking about that, I mean, most people have their first kiss at what, like 13, 14? Maybe that's old. I don't know. I'm out of the loop. I've been dating the same guy for 5 years, so I don't know the rules of dating anymore. Um, but think back to that. Now, if you're in a relationship, think back to your first kiss with that person. So not your very first kiss ever, but your first kiss with that person. Did you talk about it? Did you feel awkward? No, because things change. The pillow talk changes with us, right? Um, so this expands to not only like pillow talk with that person, so you've just engaged in this encounter with them, but you go off back with your friends and you tell them everything that happened, right? People talk. You tell these juicy stories because everybody wants to know, right? So that's not, it is pillow talk, but it's a little bit different because it's with people you did not engage in PTSI with. But I mean, thinking about your own pillow talk now, what do you do after you engage in an encounter? All right, moving forward, long term relationships. So sexual activity, it's an important factor in relationship satisfaction, quality, and stability. It's often under researched, um, with much of the focus on young adult unmarried relationships. So last year, I did a study with Dr. Martin. We were examining the norms surrounding casual sex and hookup culture. But college aged students were my primary target because they're so much more likely and willing to talk about their sexual experience in an anonymous survey than married couples, than older adults. And why do we think this is? I mean, we know that sexual activity and experience and encounters keeps us satisfied in a quality relationship and in a stable relationship. So why do we talk about it less? It's an understudied area. My personal belief is that it could be due to, you know, possibly we're afraid that things are going to come back to us and somebody will find out what we said about our partner. But it also comes down to the age of the individuals, the relationship, and the presence of children, right? So with um, age of individuals, right? I lost my place in my notes. Sorry. So with age of individuals, you've been in this long-term relationship for who knows how long. Um, and as you age, you might be engaging in sexual activity less and less. I mean, it happens. So therefore, your pillow talk is going to decrease so that intimate communication you don't really have with your partner anymore. And it just starts to decrease over time. Same with age of the relationship. When you think back to when you dated somebody, and it was brand new, the first couple of months. Sorry, I'm just so exhausted from this sickness. So for the first couple of months, everything's so great. You're talking intimately a lot. You might be engaging in sexual activity a lot. Um, you're in that honeymoon phase. But when you've been dating for years or engaged or married or what have you, that starts to decrease too. And there's a couple factors, you're out of that honeymoon stage, but also the presence of children. When you start having children, you have less time that you can engage in those types of behaviors or activities because you've got other people to think of and to take care of. And so that's what makes it really hard with the presence of children. I mean, you've got to kind of work around your kid's schedule. That's just crazy, right? But once they're moved out, you could go back to, you know, all this activity all the time. But you've gotten so used to being out of it and working on or working around children's schedule that you don't really go back to it. Okay, so that's chapter 6. Let's talk about chapter 7. Um, Three types of mediated communication: generational impact, cognitive physical aging, development and emotion and social goal setting, digital divide. All right, so this is from the 9.1 Older Adults Mediated Communication. I am on slide 3 right now. So you need to know um, the three types of mediated communication. So you've got one to one. So you contact your doctor through WVU My Chart about a prescription refill, right? You're talking directly to that doctor. We have one to many. So TV broadcasters are a single person providing a message. So think like Anderson Cooper discussing the news, or you post a picture of your Halloween costume from the other night, one to many. And then many to many. So social networking in itself is many to many. So you're scrolling through your timeline and you have similar friends in common with a million other people, and everybody's scrolling through and liking things and posting things. So that's many to many. That's social networking, right? So if you want to focus on one to many, um, maybe focus on your own post on social media, but then look at social media and social networking as a whole, for the many to many. Okay. So let's talk about generational impact. So there's a basic assumption that generations grow up in these certain social, political, economic circumstances, right? So these are experiences that happen during your formative years. They have lasting impressions on your values, your attitudes, your influences across your lifespan, right? So um my great grandmother was born shortly before the depression, right? She was born in like the 20s. The Great Depression in America happened in the 30s. She lived through that. So, all my life, whenever I would see her, she was a very frugal woman. She took napkins from restaurants, cream packets, sugars. Um, she always got leftovers, like she always took them home. At one point, she put salt in a baggie. She was a very frugal woman, but she grew up in that social, political, and economic climate of the Great Depression, right? So it's one of those things that, we hear people say, well, back in my day, and it directly relates to their generational circumstances, right? So I'm a little older than most of you. Not by much, I would assume. I mean, I don't know, at most 10 years if I've got any freshmen in this class. Um, but we have different experiences growing up. So when I was growing up, the internet became a really big thing, a really big sensation in like 98. I was like 6, 8 when that whole thing, like Y2K and everything, just like blew up. But then, I was like 14 when I got my first Facebook. I was younger than that when I had a MySpace. Y'all probably, I don't know, I can't say you never heard of MySpace, but like, how many of you actually had a MySpace, right? And now MySpace isn't a thing, and Facebook's becoming more obsolete. There was an app when I was in college called Yik Yak, where you could post things anonymously and people could upvote it or downvote it. So it's basically Reddit, but for college students to talk crap about people without getting caught. But that's not a thing anymore, right? So we often hear back in my day, and that directly relates to their generational impact. Okay. Now, this does come with overgeneralization, so we need to be aware of those. Future research is definitely needed, but we do know that um, sorry, um, life experiences impact media use and impact us. Okay. Cognitive physical aging, age related changes in your working memory, your long term memory, and your processing speed, right? As a kid, I can tell you, I could memorize things, rote memory, super easy. I was so good at it. I took my comps a year and a half ago, which I used rote memory. ROTE, but I literally wrote everything out. I used flashcards. Once I got it wrong, I would start back over. I knew my stuff. But it took me so much longer to process that information, to get that information into my long term memory, right? Um, and so these changes do have consequences for older adults' ability to process and use interpersonal communication technologies and mediated communication, right? Um, it's not that older adults are dumb. It's that they weren't born with this technology and they're starting to see some of the age related, physical, cognitive related changes. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Development, emotional, and social goal setting. As people age, they think their time, they think of their time as increasingly limited, and there's greater importance set on achieving their goals and achieving emotional meaning from life, right? So it's not, I want to learn Spanish. It's, I want to truly learn what it's like to live, right? I don't know. That's cliche, but right? And that increases their future preparedness. So, mediated communication allows older adults to share these experiences with others, hear others, understand the meaning of life. And this is different than your media usage, right? I don't log on to Instagram to learn the meaning of life. Rather, I like people's pictures, I get ideas for costumes or makeup or hairstyles. Um, I solely use TikTok to get ideas for a wedding. I'm not engaged yet, but I've been dating the same guy for 5 years, so but that's what I use that for. It's probably not what you use it for because even we are at 2 different stages in our lives, right? As individuals age, their goals for media usage begin to change as well. Okay? All right, so let's talk about the digital divide. Um, Age differences in interpersonal communication technologies and differences in media use. There are 3 identified levels. Mm. I am so sorry. Oh my gosh. All right, so internet connectivity and adoption. The distance between users and non-users. So even though adults media usage has increased, older adults still use media to a lesser extent than younger adults, right? So older adults are increasingly using more and more media, and that's going to change with each generation that comes to age, right? But you have to think about when my grandparents were my age, They didn't have any of this technology that I have. So I'm going to carry my continued media usage with me throughout my life, just as they have. It's not that it's too difficult to pick things up, but oftentimes people don't pick up media as quick when they're older, or they just don't feel like they need to or want to, right? Second, digital literacy. So these are the skills, abilities, and motivations for interpersonal communication technologies. So it's been shown that older adults do have poorer digital literacy than younger adults. They don't have the skills or abilities necessary. They don't know how to navigate the World Wide Web. My grandparents still call it that. Whenever I ask for a website from them, which bless their heart, they're the cutest. My grandparents will say, "Well, you want to go to World Wide Web dot?" And I'm like, "What?" It took me so long to figure out they were lengthening www back out to its original form, right? So they may not have the skills or ability necessary, but also they might be far less inclined for media use for information. And that could be because they just don't have this motivation to go online to search for support groups, right? It's not really their style, it's not their thing. And then some outcomes of ICT use. This level is an extension of the second level of our digital divide. So, digital literacy was level two, outcomes is an extension of that. It's difficult for them to understand what is out there. Um, ooh, sorry, I had to move my leg. Older adults reported feeling less lonely, but more depressed, anxious, and stressed and scared when thinking about internet use and media use, right? Like, I feel less lonely because I can reach out to anybody using my phone, right? I can call anybody. But there's a lot of big things out there. There's a lot of bad things out there. There's a lot of things that can scam you, can hurt you, whatever. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I've been getting at least 4 calls a day, if not more, from spam. I know not to fall for that, but maybe older adults don't, right? So you do feel less lonely, but you also have the chance of having increased depression, anxiety, sorry, stress, and just being scared all around. All right, so that's what you need to know for chapter 7. If there's any questions over that, let me know. And then finally, chapter 8, intra cohort variation, exogenous and endogenous forces, and dynamic destabilization. So this is back to the 10.1 TSGs and comm research. I'm on slide 3. So these are all the problems of generations. So remember, I believe this chapter was um, stereotyping generations in comm research. Um, I can't fully remember. I don't have my book on me just right now. So there are 3 features by Mannheim: intra-cohort variation, exogenous, endogenous forces of change, and exo is outside forces, and endo, sorry, email, are forces that originate within, and then dynamic destabilization, right? So let's talk about intra-cohort variation. This is within the cohort. It's important to note that it means within. So when you're thinking intra-cohort, you should be thinking within the cohort. So us as a team within, right? It's not me looking at a cohort who's a birth year ahead of me, right? I'm part of the cohort. Um, and it focuses on the generational analysis within the cohort. So in this feature, one starts with the most broad or generation concept and then begins to narrow the concept into subsets, manifestations of the previous one. Think about choosing a topic for a specific area and study, and you need to know how to map this out. So I highly suggest looking at slide 3 in the intra cohort variation notes, because you will have to map this out, and you are not allowed to use the specific area of study in college or specific area of study as your topic. So you need to be able to map this out so you can understand, right? So we all start with this very broad focus, right? Our direct major. I can only speak to communication. That's what all 3 of my degrees are in. But um, I can talk about some of the subsets. So we start with the narrow based, or so we want to start narrowing based on our interests. So I chose the health communication route for my master's and my PhD, right? But that's a little more focused. So we have to start back at square one, communication, right? So, hey, communication major, but then there's social media, there's video gaming, there's organizational, interpersonal, health, um, instructional, rhetoric. Those are just 8 that I named. There's mass media, there's family, right? There's all these different kinds. So we have to focus it, we have to narrow it a little bit more, right? I mean, I wouldn't choose health comm if I was really interested in organizational. Or maybe I would, but I would focus it, right? So we have to think about it like that. How are we going to focus our majors, right? So communication to health communication, right? Then within health communication, what type of health communication do I want to study? Mental health, physical health, doctor patient communication, relationship based communication, caregivers. There's all these different areas. Me personally, I chose mental health. And then when we get in mental health, then you have to focus on what type of mental health, right? So I focus on mental health campaigns. So it goes comm, mental health campaigns, right? You apply this to the intra cohorts as well. We just have to map it out starting with the broad points, right? And this does help us avoid problematic generational stereotyping. So we're not focused on just stereotypes of the generation as a whole. Maybe that's what gets us started is the stereotype, all older adults are hard of hearing. But then we break it down, and that helps us focus on within. Okay. Um, think about the generational location as well. That's something with intra cohort. So, like the book, I think it was the book, gave the example of 9/11. Depending on your location, like it was a big deal for everybody, right? Um, 9/11 was terrifying for everybody. It's a pretty stereotypical statement, but that's true. However, I grew up in Midwestern Illinois, West Virginia, couple hours from New York, couple hours from the Pentagon, DC, all that, right? So, based on our locations, might have a different impact. Not saying it wasn't horrible for everybody, not saying that at all, but it could be different. Okay. All right, exo and endo forces. So there's the generational imprinting hypothesis. These are worldviews and actions of young cohorts are marked by events in history and societal conditions during the period of which they came of age. Right? So These units can be conscious, they don't have to develop generational collective identity, and they do work to create change. Or they can be unconscious, so experience in history in the manner of social generation, but it doesn't identify their group as distinctive in the generational terms. Okay. So generational units is based on collective identity of the generation. So think about your social media use, right? It's something you've always had. You've been born into this, well, at least the internet. It's something you feel as though is a part of you or within your generation, endo. Whereas older generations weren't born with this kind of technology. They don't see it as a part of their generation. So it's an outside force working to create change, right? Um, how many of y'all have home phones, landlines at your house? Probably not many of us, right? This is a technological advance with smartphones. And um, there's this trend on TikTok where if you ask people like my age and above, like, oh, pretend you're answering the phone, we're going to go like this. This is what I do. But if you ask young kids, pretend to answer the phone, they do this because this is what you do with an iPhone. It's not what we did. Landlines were different. This looked more like a landline. This looks more like an iPhone, right? So just thinking about how these forces can imprint on us. You know, the iPhone hasn't been out for that long, but there are several young people who they were born in this time where the iPhone was huge. And therefore, every time a new one comes out, they get a new phone, right? And I'm not gonna lie, I used to be one of those people. I had like my contract was set up, it was so perfect. My contract was set up and it was like as soon as the new iPhone, so like last September, the iPhone 11 came out. Typically, the 11 SE or the 11 XR or the 11 whatever would have come out this September. And then next September, the iPhone 12, right? So, like, I was one of those people. But how does that impact my use um, of media, right? So, thinking about the exo and endo forces, mm, sorry, and then dynamic destabilization. So, the difference between cohorts and social generations is group participation in the social process. It is the process that makes the generation. Yeah, I just got a silenced call again. We were talking about we were talking about bill collectors and spam. Not bill collectors, spam bill collectors. So the generational change emerges out of social relations between both cohorts. So each who came to age during different historical periods, they have different perspectives and different worldviews, right? You came to age in different times of the world. That's going to impact how you view things, your values, your experiences, your opinions. But there's also, so that's between cohorts and then within cohorts, generation units in the same actual generation. Okay. So these changes do occur over time. They can be shaped by older generations, but social aspects do play a role. So with dynamic destabilization, we think about like all these traditions that we have, right? Those have been impacted by um, by older generations, or so we think. But really, there are social aspects to it. So, thinking about the veil at a wedding. Weddings are starting to get away from the traditional perspective. I am loving this because there's a lot of traditions that I find very weird, very unnerving that I don't want. I don't want like any part of it. So, veils. Veils were a huge thing at weddings when arranged marriages were a huge deal. And that's because the groom could not see the bride, and if the bride happened to be ugly, he could not back out because he wouldn't see her until the very last second, right? Um that's an old tradition. Some women still want to wear veils. They follow that tradition because that's what their mom did and their grandma and their great grandma and blah 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 whatever, right? But that's a social aspect as well. It's not just something that somebody one day was like, I want to put this fishnet over my face and then go get married. They don't do that. So it's something to keep in mind that, yes, this dynamic happens because our grandparents did it, our great grandparents, whoever. It's been passed down for many, many years, you know? Um, in my family, sorry, I'll finish that statement really quick. But it's not just being passed down for many years. There's that social aspect that started it. Okay. And so that's the dynamic destabilization. In my family, it is very common for all the daughters to be given a ring when she is born. Literally a baby, right? I got a ring. And growing up, I heard my whole life, oh, it's just tradition, it's just tradition, it's just tradition. But really, and you got this ring with the design that you liked or you wanted or whatever. Like one of mine has a teddy bear on it, right? And this is probably just my family. But really, the babies get rings. I might have just said women, but it's all babies. The babies get rings. So if somebody switches them, you can tell because your baby won't have the ring on because most people don't think to take that off. Like, what? So it's a tradition in my family that now I have to buy my future children rings because everybody else has. I've got my little ring. It's weird. It's weird. All right. So that is chapter 8. There are going to be 11 questions. Each question has the point number marked with it. And sorry, has the point number marked with it. It's going to be short answer, essay style questions. Some are going to require you to actually do some explaining, some writing. Some of them are just going to say, list this out. Um, Even if it says list and explain, like list and explain the 3 domains or the 8 domains, not 3, the 8 domains of age stereotypes. You could list them out and put a little hyphen. You could do bullet points, put a little hyphen and be like, religion and spirituality, stereotypes, blah, blah, blah. Right? So, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to answer anything. If there's something you want me to go a little more depth in, again, do the same and let me know what you need. Best of luck. The exam is due by this Friday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yeah. So, good luck.